The jungle held its breath. Moonlight filtered through torn leaves, washing the clearing in silver as insects buzzed in the dark like tiny, trembling engines. Hidden behind a fallen palm, an American airman pressed his back against the bark, fingers trembling around a weapon that shouldn't exist. The metal was rough, jagged in places hydraulic tubing, a bent fragment of fuselage, and the firing pin he'd carved from a broken bolt. It looked more like a pile of scrap welded together by desperation than a gun. But tonight, it was the only thing keeping him alive. Footsteps whispered through the brush slow, methodical, too many to count. Japanese voices drifted closer, speaking low, confident, unaware. They weren't hunting an army. They believed they were sweeping the jungle for a single unarmed survivor. Someone weak, someone dying. He drew a shallow breath, raised the weapon, and prayed the metal wouldn't jam. A crack split the night sharp. Violent. One soldier dropped instantly, collapsing into the mud with no cry, only shock frozen on his face. The patrol halted, startled, eyes darting into the darkness. Another shot. Another fall. Panic rippled through the squad as they shouted orders, scrambling for cover, unable to comprehend what killed their comrades. No rifle in Japanese inventory sounded like this. No American firearm could be this silent or crude. Something impossible was stalking them. The airman steadied his aim again, heartbeat shaking his ribs. He didn't have long before they regrouped. Before they realized the truth, that the ghost in the trees was armed, and he'd built his weapon from the wreckage of his own death, and this was only the beginning. The sky was supposed to be his safe place. He had spent years beneath roaring engines, tightening bolts, calibrating fuel lines, and patching bullet holes. Up there, wrapped in steel and speed, he felt untouchable, just another cog keeping the war machine alive. But on that night, in the belly of a B-25 bomber groaning under its own weight, the sky turned against him. The mission wasn't supposed to be complicated, a reconnaissance run along the Pacific, just far enough from enemy scout routes to stay invisible, close enough to photograph supply routes. He wasn't even supposed to be on board. He was a mechanic, not a gunner. But the tail gunner had come down with malaria, and the crew needed a replacement. He told himself he could handle it. He knew the blueprint of the plane better than anyone aboard. He didn't know that would make the crash so much worse. The attack began without warning. No engine roar, no distant hum-just gunfire carving through the fuselage like lightning through dry wood. A swarm of Japanese Zeros materialized from clouds, circling them like vultures sensing death. The bomber shook violently as metal splintered, fuel lines ruptured, and one engine began to sputter, coughing flames into the wind. Hit on port. We're losing pressure. The pilot shouted. He scrambled to the tail, loading the turret with trembling hands. He fired blindly, tracing arcs of burning bullets across the sky, hitting nothing. The plane dipped lower. Smoke poured in. Someone screamed. He never figured out who. Another burst. A deafening explosion. The wing tore open like paper. They were falling. He barely remembered the plunge, wind-tearing skin, goggles ripped away, water swallowing him whole. The ocean was a black, merciless void, waves smashing him in every direction. He kicked upward, lungs burning, finally breaking the surface, only to watch flaming debris rain around him. Pieces of the bomber vanished beneath the waves. Bodies floated like broken dolls. Oil spread across the water in a shimmering film. He called out names: Silas, Brenner, O'Reilly, but the only answer was the hiss of burning gasoline and distant gunfire. He swam until his arms refused to move. Dawn bled across the horizon, revealing an island, a dense mass of jungle wrapped around jagged shoreline. He dragged himself onto the sand, fingers clawing the earth like a man escaping hell. Then he heard voices. Japanese voices. He crawled into the brush before they saw him, body shaking, head throbbing. His ribs felt cracked. His right leg wouldn't bear weight. His uniform was shredded. He lay motionless as enemy soldiers collected debris along the shore, inspecting bodies, dragging the living into trucks. He saw O'Reilly breathing, wounded, hauled away with a rifle pressed to his spine. He wanted to scream. He wanted to run after him. But he was in no position to fight. He was unarmed, injured, alone, and stranded behind enemy lines with no rescue coming. The bomber had crashed deep within Japanese-held territory. There was no map, no radio, no food, only the smoking ruin of what had once been his lifeline. When night fell, he limped deeper into the jungle. Rain hammered the canopy, washing blood from his wounds. Every crack of a twig sounded like footsteps. Every rustle of leaves felt like a patrol closing in. He survived on rainwater collected in palm leaves. He ate insects, wild fruit he prayed wasn't poisonous, anything he could tear from the earth. Fever came and went. Days blurred. His strength faded. He found the wreckage of the bomber tangled between rocks far from shore, half buried like a corpse returned by the sea. Inside were pieces of twisted aluminum, scorched wiring, fragments of gun belts, and hydraulic cylinders leaking oily residue. Useless to most men, but not to him. He wasn't just a mechanic. He was the son of a gunsmith. He'd spent childhood evenings filing barrels, cleaning chambers, learning the language of metal. His hands, blistered and shaking, traced the debris like he was touching memories. If he couldn't be rescued, he could at least fight, not with fists. Not with prayer, with steel, the first spark of an idea flickered in his mind as he gripped a bent length of tubing, a barrel. Waiting to be reborn, he wasn't just stranded. He was arming himself, and the jungle was about to learn what desperation could build, because survival wasn't enough anymore. He wanted revenge. The rain had washed away the blood that clung to his skin, but not the smell of burning metal. Days after the crash, the wreckage still groaned in the surf like a wounded beast, broken ribs of fuselage jutting from the sand, wires dangling like torn sinew. The island was quiet tonight except for the tide and the distant crack of rifle fire, reminding him that somewhere out there, other survivors were being hunted or held captive. He stood knee-deep in the shattered remains of the bomber, hands blackened with grease. The sun had scorched his neck raw, his body still weak from hunger, fever, and infection. But his mind was awake in a way it hadn't been since before the war. He wasn't just scavenging metal, he was rebuilding purpose. He pulled a length of hydraulic tubing from the wreck, twisting it free with both hands until it snapped loose. The interior was smooth too wide for standard ammo, but workable with reinforcement and pressure. He tested airflow through it, then tapped the ends, listening to the ring of metal. It wasn't perfect, but it was close enough to a barrel to become dangerous. Next, he found a fractured section of the landing's strut-dense alloy, sturdy, ideal for a firing chamber. Strips of aluminum skin, torn from the aircraft frame, could be shaved down into barrel braces. A bent rudder hinge could become a crude trigger. Even the oxygen tanks punctured and rusting held enough compressed force to experiment with ignition pressure. To most people, it was junk. To him, it was potential. He worked with the patience of a surgeon and the desperation of a hunted animal. Nights were spent under the jungle canopy, firelight kept low, hammering metal against stone, sharpening rods into firing pins. Days were spent observing patrol routes, learning when he could return to the wreck without being spotted. He carried no blueprint-only memory. He remembered long, winter nights back home, sitting in his father's workshop in Iowa, the smell of oil, soot, walnut gunstock shavings, the metallic click of his father's hands assembling pistols for hunters and ranchers. "A gun isn't built to kill," his father always said. "It's built to survive something bigger than you." Back then it sounded like philosophy. Now, it sounded like prophecy. He held up the half-assembled weapon in the flickering glow. It was ugly, more pipe than rifle. A Frankenstein hybrid of discarded war parts. But the structure was sound, a single-shot, pressure-ignited launcher capable of firing stripped-down 7.62 millimeters. Rounds he'd salvaged from belts pulled off dead crewmen. The challenge wasn't the barrel. It was ignition. In normal firearms, ignition came from mechanical force striking a primer loaded with explosive powder. He didn't have a standard breech system or primers in usable shape. Most ammo he recovered was waterlogged or crushed, so he improvised a rear pressure chamber built from a sealed hydraulic line and a slotted striker plate. The idea was insane: use compression and spark to ignite rounds manually. One miscalculation, and the barrel could explode in his hands, but death by Japanese. Patrol seemed far more certain. He wedged the prototype into the roots of a fallen tree, pointed away from him, and tied a vine to the trigger latch. He backed away several paces, heart pounding. Hand trembling, the jungle held still. He pulled, a flare of sparks, nothing more. Smoke dribbled out, a weak hiss. Failure. He tightened the seal. Reinforced the chamber. Filed the firing pin sharper. Pulled again, a pop echoed through the trees. Loud enough to travel. Too loud. Birds scattered overhead. His teeth clenched. If a patrol was nearby, they'd hear it. Still no projectile. He nearly slammed the weapon against a rock. Anger welled up, anger at fate, at war, at being reduced to this primal struggle. He slumped against a tree, chest burning, eyes wet before he realized he was crying. Maybe it was fever. Maybe it was fear. Or maybe it was the realization that he might die here, unarmed. Forgotten. Then he saw the casing. The round had deformed, meaning heat had reached the powder. Just not enough force to expel it. He wiped his face and stood again. Another attempt. More. Reinforcement. A stronger seal. Hours passed. The moon climbed. The jungle darkened. At last. He cocked the striker, took a position behind a log, and pulled. A sharp, violent crack erupted into the night. Louder, cleaner, a round shot into the trees, smacking deep into wood with a satisfying thud. His breath caught. His hands shook. His teeth gritted in a grin he hadn't felt since before the crash. It worked. Ugly, unstable, unpredictable, but it worked. He held the weapon in both hands, the metal still warm, the barrel smoking faintly. In his reflection on the steel, he didn't see a mechanic. He didn't see prey. He saw a man reborn into something dangerous, a survivor with teeth. For the first time since the bomber fell, hope didn't feel like a lie, but hope came paired with dread. Because now that he could fight, he had no excuse not to. He looked toward the jungle where distant fires burned Japanese camps. Soldiers laughing over captured men. He had built a weapon. Now he had to use it. Not for pride. Not for country. For the ones taken alive, because he wasn't done fighting. Not yet. The jungle had become a second skin, dense, wet, and alive with sounds he no longer feared, only measured. Every rustle, every shift of wind had a pattern. The insects hummed in steady waves. The birds called at predictable intervals at dawn and dusk. It was the unfamiliar noises, the metallic clink of a bayonet, the crisp snap of a boot heel that set his nerves on fire. This morning, that sound came earlier than usual. He woke just as dawn painted the treetops gold, heart thudding painfully. Something was wrong. The jungle wasn't waking up the way it always did. The normal chorus of birds was muted, replaced by hushed conversation carried on the breeze. Japanese, multiple voices. Moving slowly, sweeping the brush like hunters tracking wounded prey. They'd found something. He slipped into a crouch, staying low beneath tangled vines. He pushed aside a palm frond, careful not to bend it. Bent leaves meant tracks. His eyes narrowed as shapes emerged through the mist. 3 scouts, lightly armed, moving methodically. One knelt beside a muddy pool, fingers tracing footprints, his footprints from the night he carried metal scraps back to shelter. Another pressed a compass beneath the sunlight, orienting direction toward the wreckage. The third scanned the trees with a rifle, eyes sharp, posture tense. He had been careful. Careful wasn't enough. He clutched his improvised weapon tighter, feeling its weight press into his palm. The barrel was wrapped in cloth to dampen reflection. The firing chamber bore fingerprints of soot from repeated testing. He'd intended to refine it more before ever firing in combat. He didn't have that luxury now. He watched the patrol move closer, step by careful step. If they followed the trail, they'd reach his shelter, nothing more than a cave of woven branches near the wreckage. Once discovered, they wouldn't assume a lost survivor. They would assume resistance. They would send more. He could run, disappear deeper into the jungle, survive another day. But the faces of his captured crew haunted him. O'Reilly limp between 2 soldiers. The pilot bleeding from the mouth, dragged away to who knows where. If he kept running, eventually he would die silent and alone, and their suffering would be for nothing. He breathed slowly, lowering himself behind a tree. He aimed. He could barely steady the barrel. His hands were shaking not from fear, but disbelief. He had never killed a man on foot. He had never looked a living enemy in the eye. The scouts stopped. One pointed toward his shelter. They were close enough now to hear him breathe if he exhaled too loud. He adjusted aim, aligning the crude sights with the lead scout's torso. He took a slow breath, steadying his shoulder. Just fire. His finger tightened on the trigger latch. Nothing. He cursed silently. Pressure chamber. Misaligned. He twisted a valve, adjusted the pin, and pulled again. The gun roared to life with a violent, metallic crack louder than any test round before. A blast that punched the silence like a grenade going off. The nearest scout jerked backward, body snapping as the improvised round tore through his chest, leaving a spray of blood across ferns. He collapsed instantly, eyes wide, face frozen in pure confusion. The other two stumbled. Stunned not because a man had fallen, but because of how he'd fallen. No rifle they knew produced a shot like that, not so crude, not so sudden, not so close, for a heartbeat. No one moved. Then chaos. One scout dove for cover. The other raised his rifle, firing wildly into the trees. Bullets ripped through leaves inches from the airman's shoulder. He ducked instinctively, chest slamming into the dirt. He rolled, grabbing fallen branches for cover as another burst split the foliage. The gun shook in his hands, its barrel overheated. Smoke rising, chamber hissing dangerously. A second shot now could blow apart the improvised seal, sending metal shards into his face. He weighed the risk in a second, but instinct overruled logic. He cocked the striker again. The scout closest to him advanced carefully, believing the survivor had fled deeper into the brush. The man moved within 10 feet, rifle raised. Scanning tree roots and fallen logs, the airman rose just enough to see his silhouette. He pulled. Bang, crack, snap. The second shot fired, but weaker powder partially burned, projectile tumbling. Still deadly at close range. The round struck the scout in the throat, dropping him in a choking, gurgling heap. The third scout fled. He didn't shoot. He couldn't. The chamber glowed red hot. Any more pressure could detonate in his hands. He let the fleeing soldier go, panting, crouched over the gun, waiting for the heat to fade. His ears rang violently. The world faded to silence except for the pounding of his pulse. Two bodies lay still. The leaves around them glistened with blood, steam rising in the morning heat. He stared, unable to move, unable to look away. He had built this thing. He had killed with it. Not by accident. Not in wartime abstraction. Not from a distant aircraft turret, face to face. His stomach twisted not with regret, but with the weight of what he had unleashed. Killing a man from above was mechanical. Killing a man on the ground was personal. He crawled forward and checked the weapon, hands trembling. There were fractures along the chamber hairline stress lines that hadn't been there before. The barrel had warped ever so slightly. If he kept using it like this, it would eventually fail catastrophically, but stopping wasn't an option. He wiped the barrel clean with torn cloth, absorbing the last traces of blood where it had splattered across the metal. That's when he heard it, distant voices. Many of them. They were calling out, responding to the gunfire. Boots pounded through brush. Orders barked. The jungle lit up with search torches. He looked one last time at the dead men, then slipped back into the trees. Every sense on fire. He had proven the weapon worked. He had proven he could kill, but in doing so, he had awakened the island. No longer was he just a stranded mechanic. To them, he was now an armed enemy combatant, a ghost with a weapon that shouldn't exist. They would come for him now, not with 3 men, but platoons. He tightened his grip on the gun, breathing hard. Adrenaline still burning through his veins. He was done running. If they wanted to hunt him, he would hunt back. The night settled over the jungle like a damp shroud, thick with humidity and the distant hum of insects. The wreckage of the B-24 bomber, once a machine of roaring power, now lay half swallowed by vines, panels torn, stripped, reshaped into traps and ammunition. The makeshift rifle rested across his lap, still warm from the last shot. He sat inside a shallow trench covered with branches, mud smeared across his face. Breath steady, they were coming again. Japanese boots crushed wet leaves somewhere beyond the tree line. Not marching, searching, coordinated, determined. He wiped sweat from his eyes. They finally stopped underestimating me. But it didn't matter. He needed more distance. More time. He checked the weapon. Spring-chambered firing pin reinforced with landing gear steel. Barrel formed from a hydraulic pressure tube. Trigger mechanism from cockpit linkage. The gun shouldn't exist, certainly shouldn't kill. Yet 20 hours ago it spilled a man's spine across. Mangrove roots like red threads? Now? They'd branded him something else. Double quotes BAKEMO. The monster. Whispers drifted through the jungle like superstition. Some soldiers refused to patrol at night. Others believed the Americans had ghosts who never died. He let those rumors grow. A flare burst overhead, blinding white, turning leaves silver. Shadows scattered. The Americans would never drop flares here. This was Japanese. They were tightening the noose. He whispered to himself, voice nearly lost beneath the cicadas. 3 seconds. They're blinded too. He raised the rifle, sighted through twisted metal irons. A soldier's helmet glinted. The shot cracked, echoing like thunder through the valley. The man pitched forward, face first into mud. Rifle tumbling from slack fingers, he didn't wait to watch. He slid backwards into the ravine, using vines to lower himself quietly. The gun wasn't designed for rapid firing. Barrel heat warped aim, recoil was unpredictable. Every bullet counted, each one hand-shaved powder measured from scavenged flare cartridges. 2 shots left in this tube. He crouched low. Boots approached. 5 men, no 7. They paused beside the corpse. "Sniper!" one shouted. "Far? Where?" "He's moving like shadow." "Impossible." "He uses captured weapon?" "Captured weapon." He nearly laughed despite the fear. If only they knew. He set the next trap in motion, pulling a cord taut between 2 trees. On the ground, shredded engine bearings, honed to razor points, dangled above a shallow pit. Nothing lethal by itself until panic forced soldiers into it. Then he waited. Their flashlights scanned trees. One kicked the dead soldier's body, rage rising. The captain barked orders. "Spread! Fan out! He cannot be alone!" They advanced, and a boot snagged the tripwire. Snap. Spikes dropped like falling teeth. Metal tore flesh. A scream ripped through the jungle, wet and raw. Soldiers rushed toward him, exactly what he intended. He bolted through brush, sliding down a muddy slope, ripping leaves aside. They followed the sound, chasing him blindly. Adrenaline overriding caution, he reached the hollow beneath a rusted bomber wing. This was where the second trap waited. He gripped a wire and pulled hard. A fuel-soaked panel dropped like a guillotine, smashing branches into sparks. The flame roared upward, swallowing dry palm leaves, lighting the night like a torch. The silhouettes of soldiers flailed, uniforms burning, screams echoing into darkness. He fired once into the chaos, 1 bullet, 1 silhouette collapsing. The fire masked muzzle flash. Smoke drifted like black ghosts. 5 down, maybe 6. But his breathing stayed calm. He wasn't fighting to survive now, he was hunting. As the flames died, he retreated deeper into marshland. Mosquitoes swarmed his arms, mud clung to his boots like concrete. His muscles trembled, not with fear, but from days without sleep. The weapon lay across his chest while he rested in reeds. He thought of home, of the bomber crew, of letters crumpled in pockets of dead men. Did this make him a soldier? Or just another killer? A twig snapped. He sat up. 2 scouts crept silently through Reed's officers, judging by their clean boots and ceremonial tanta blades. They scanned water, whispering softly. He is not human. Nobody builds a rifle from scrap. 20 men last night. Command thinks we are lying. 20. The number finally landed on him like a weight. He raised his weapon slowly. The chamber clacked too loud. Their heads turned instantly. One drew steel dash, charging. The shot hit him center mass, knocking him backward into the water. The other stumbled back, shocked, not by the death but by the weapon itself, staring wide-eyed as if seeing a demon. "You cannot be real," he whispered. The man fled. He let him go. Let the rumor spread further. Let fear do the killing. At dusk, the jungle trembled with the march of a larger force, dozens, maybe more. The enemy finally believed. Not in a ghost and a threat that needed to be erased, he rose from his hiding spot, clutching the rifle like a relic. He wasn't winning this fight, but he could choose how to be remembered. He moved ahead of them, positioning himself above a narrow channel carved by flood's unnatural choke point. He wedged the rifle against a tree root and steadied his breath, marching feet. A line of helmets. Long rifles, bayonets, precision. No traps. No running. Just aim. He fired and fired. And fired. Bodies toppled like dominoes into the stream. Soldiers scrambled for cover, shooting wildly at shadows. But he shifted position after every round, slipping through foliage. Echoing gunfire from every angle. They were fighting ghosts, just like the story said. Until the final round clicked empty. Silence crept in. He had no ammo left. The moon hung cold above him, lighting branches like bones. He looked down at the rifle-sharp edges drenched in mud and blood. It had done more in 2 days than entire platoons. He laid it beneath a fallen tree, half buried, half hidden. If they want the ghost? He stepped into darkness. Let them chase shadows forever. Rain fell in slow, miserable sheets, washing the dried blood off rusted metal and soaking the churned earth beneath his feet. The once dense jungle around the bomber wreck no longer felt alive. Charred trunks stood like gravestones, leaves reduced to ash, smoke lingering long after the flames died. He moved through the ruins limping, ribs bruised, left forearm wrapped in torn parachute silk. Each breath scraped his lungs like metal filings. The Japanese had changed tactics. Where before they hunted shadows, now they hunted a contagion. They brought flamethrowers, mortar shells, squads in rotating shifts, burning entire sections of forest just to smoke him out. The nights no longer carried the sounds of insects or birds. Only the crackle of fire and the distant battle cries of men chasing a ghost. He wasn't a ghost anymore. He was tired. He was bleeding. He was mortal. He collapsed beside the wing of the bomber, now scorched and half-melted, his body trembling from exhaustion. He opened the chamber of his rifle, counting what remained, 3 rounds. 3. He ran his thumb over the scratched brass, feeling each imperfection, each hastily cut groove. These bullets weren't ammunition, they were time. And he was running out of it for the first time since he crashed here. The silence frightened him more than footsteps. He leaned his head back against the metal carcass and closed his eyes. He saw the face of the first man he killed, eyes wide, mouth open, not in rage but shock. A farm boy? A father? Someone who didn't ask for this any more than he did. He whispered into the rain, voice cracking, "I didn't come here to kill anyone." But kill he did? 20 soldiers. Maybe more in the fires. Their screams clung to him like smoke, thicker than the humidity. He thought of his crewmen burned alive and the crashmen he could not save. Maybe this is balance? Maybe this is what's left of me paying something back. But the thought didn't comfort him. Revenge wasn't what kept him breathing. Survival wasn't either. Somewhere along the way, the line blurred. He had become the thing they feared. And now even he feared what he had become. A distant horn sounded through the trees, echoed by shouted orders. Not panicked now, coordinated. They weren't afraid anymore. They were furious. Through the smoked black canopy, he spotted torchlight weaving in a long line, dozens of soldiers advancing in formation. Not searching. Sweeping. Cutting through the jungle like a wall of bayonets and fire. He staggered to his feet, grabbing his rifle, heart hammering. He couldn't fight them head-on. Not again. Not with 3 bullets, torn muscles, and a fever burning beneath his skin. He stumbled toward the marshland's water up to his knees. Mud sucking his boots down, mosquitoes biting until blood streamed behind his ears. His vision blurred, his reflection on the water looked foreign, eyes sunken, cheeks gaunt. "You're not a soldier anymore," he muttered. "You're just a wounded animal." At nightfall, the enemy changed tactics. They began calling his name, at first faintly mispronounced, distorted by accents, then clearer. Come out. We know you're hurt. We will spare you. You are alone. Your country abandoned you? Someone even imitated English badly, but enough. You did. Enough fighting. Stop now. We treat you, food. The voice wavered on the last word, as if even the speaker didn't believe it. He pressed his forehead against wet bark, fists trembling. Was this a trick? Of course, but the tone, the humanity of it stabbed deeper than any bayonet. He remembered sharing cigarettes with captured enemies earlier in the war. They talked about families, farms, fishing seasons, men who never met except through orders, written by governments. Far away, now he hunted men who might have once sat beside him as equals. His grip on the rifle tightened. If I die here, no one will know why. Not the Americans. Not the Japanese. Not even himself. By dawn his fever worsened. Infection crawled up his arm where jagged metal had sliced him days earlier. The cloth dressing smelled foul. His strength drained like leaking fuel. He fired a warning shot into the air, not at a target, just to keep himself awake, to remind himself he still existed. The jungle answered with silence. No retaliation. No charge, no gunfire. They were letting him rot, letting hunger, illness, isolation do their work. A cruel strategy. The smartest one, yet. He tried to stand and collapsed, cheek sinking into wet soil. The world spun. Black spots filled the edges of his vision. He dug fingers into earth, forcing breath into his lungs. Not like this. He crawled back toward the wreckage, dragging himself with elbows when his legs failed, not to fight. To lie beside the bodies of the men he knew. To rest where his crew died. To let the jungle take him beside the machine. They fell from the sky and, maybe that was enough, from the crack between twisted metal plates. He watched dawn shimmer over smoke-scarred trees. Birds cautiously returned to charred branches. The world, uncaring, continued. He raised the rifle slowly, resting it across his stomach, not aiming outward, but holding it like a relic, like something that had taken too much from both sides. He whispered, barely audible. This wasn't supposed to be a legacy. Just a way to live one more day. Now the weapon felt heavier than steel. It felt like a ledger of debts unpaid. He closed his eyes, chest rising and falling. SHLLO. Why? He didn't know whether he hoped the enemy would find him, or hoped they wouldn't. The storm broke just before dawn, leaving a thin veil of mist hovering over the burned-out jungle. He lay behind the wreckage, body shaking with fever, breath shallow and uneven. The rifle rested across his chest, cold now, almost lifeless, its edges dulled by rust and blood. He no longer felt the urgency to grip it. His fingers had loosened days ago, strength bleeding out with every heartbeat. What surprised him most wasn't the pain, it was the stillness. The Japanese patrols had gone silent. No torches. No boots in the mud. No commands cutting through the undergrowth. It was as if the island itself had exhaled and stepped back, leaving him alone with the wreckage and ghosts. He wondered if they believed he was dead. He wondered if they were right. A distant rumble rolled across the sky, soft at first, easily mistaken for thunder. Then clearer, mechanical, rhythmic aircraft engines. He blinked, forcing swollen eyes open. The sky blurred with motion, 3 silhouettes sweeping low over the canopy, wings glinting in fractured sunlight. American reconnaissance planes. For a long moment he didn't move. Part of him thought he was hallucinating. Another part believed it didn't matter anymore, but around his neck, inside his flight vest, the signal flares. 2 left. He pushed himself upright. Pain exploded through his ribs. He nearly collapsed, but he dragged his body across the mud, teeth clenched, breath ragged. He reached a clearer patch of ground where charred leaves formed a natural clearing. His vision swam as he loaded the flare, hands shaking, knees buckling. Come on, come on. Just once more. He pulled the trigger. A streak of crimson fire shot into the sky, hissing upward like a final battle cry before drifting into smoke. The planes banked. They saw him by midday. Boots crunched through the scorched earth. American boots. A Marine rescue squad fanned out cautiously, rifles up. Expecting ambush, what they found instead was a half-conscious airman leaning against a melted engine block. Weapon across his lap like an offering. One of the Marines knelt beside him. "Jesus, you're alive." He tried to answer, but only a rasp escaped his throat. They carried him to a stretcher, swatting insects away, wrapping him in blankets that smelled of salt and diesel. For the first time since the crash, he felt human hands not as a threat, but as a lifeline. As they lifted him onto the waiting boat, he heard an officer behind him. "Grab that weapon, whatever the hell it is." He woke again days later aboard a hospital ship. Clean sheets, bandaged wounds, morphine soft delight. A nurse checked his pulse, smiled gently, told him he was safe. He almost didn't believe her. 2 officers entered, not soldiers from the jungle, but men in pressed uniforms, polished boots, silver pens clipped to folders. Intelligence corps. They didn't ask how he survived. They asked how the weapon worked. He explained what he remembered: the tubing, the makeshift firing pin, the casing designs, the scavenged ammunition. They took notes, nodding, occasionally exchanging glances. Then one of them spoke, tone carefully neutral. "The weapon is now government property. You understand?" He did. "We'll keep the reports classified. No need to confuse things on paper." Another phrase lingered unspoken. No need to acknowledge what shouldn't have been possible. Weeks passed. His strength returned. He walked the deck again, leaning on rails, watching the horizon where sea met sky in a perfect, indifferent line. He asked once quietly how many bodies had been counted on the island. The officers never answered. Back in the States, he was discharged honorably. No medals, no mentions of the island. His debrief file stamped restricted, unverified. Engagements. History swallowed the story whole. Newspapers printed only a single sentence. 1 survivor recovered from down B-24. Pacific Sector. No word of 20 dead men. No word of a gun built from wreckage. No word of a ghost in the jungle. He returned home to fields, quiet roads, the smell of gasoline in a peacetime workshop. At night he lay awake listening to crickets under an open sky. And sometimes in the silence he heard the brittle click of a homemade trigger, and wondered if it was real at all. Years later, a stranger asked him what it felt like to survive a crash like that. He paused, eyes drifting somewhere far beyond the conversation, beyond the years. "It wasn't the crash that haunted me," he said softly. "It was what I had to become to walk away from it." He never built another weapon, but sometimes working late in the shop alone, he'd run his hand across cold metal scraps and remember the jungle, remember the heat, the fear, the fire in the night, and he'd whisper to himself, almost in disbelief, "No one ever believed that gun existed. Maybe that's for the best."